Luke Skywalker, the young Jedi with impossible expectations weighing on his shoulders. The one and only hope for the galaxy, the son of the Chosen One, the heir apparent to the Jedi legacy, a hero, a savior, a legend. And Rey, the final descendant of the malign Darth Sidious, a girl born of evil, bound for darkness, but ultimately destined to walk a different path. She too, a young and aspiring Jedi, the apprentice of Luke's sister, Leia, a new hero of a different war, fought in a different time. Two characters of similar yet also very different origins. Luke's father, the dark apprentice of Rey's grandfather. Both Rey and Luke were hidden away from their evil ancestors who would have either killed them or molded them into elite Sith assassins who surely would one day outgrow their teachers. Instead though, they were stashed away on backwater desert worlds until the time was right to call them into action. And when that time came, both prodigal children would rise to the challenge. In short order, they would climb the ranks, often learning on the go, while also making important revelations about their family's histories and about themselves. In time, Luke would face his father, defeat him, and ultimately turn his heart. He would turn Darth Vader back to the light. Together, they would destroy the Emperor, and the galaxy would be saved. 3 decades later, a similar story would play out. Rey's role was ultimately to take down Supreme Leader Snoke, and then when he revealed himself, Palpatine as well. But first, she needed her partner. In time, like her predecessor did with his father, Rey would guide Ben Solo back to the light, and together they would destroy Snoke, prevent the return of Darth Sidious, and free the galaxy once more. Rey and Luke are similar in so many ways that if you squint hard enough, you might just mistake one for the other. But at the same time, if we dig a little deeper, we can find many differences, big and small, that set them apart and make them unique in their own ways. And so, with the stage now being set, let's ask the question. Who was more powerful? Return of the Jedi Luke or Rise of Skywalker Rey? Now before I give my thoughts on this, let's just make sure that the conditions of this comparison are abundantly clear. We are not evaluating Luke Skywalker at anywhere near the peak of his power. We're not talking about him in The Mandalorian or The Last Jedi or anywhere in between. We are examining a very young and raw Luke Skywalker. And the same goes for Rey, who has had even less training and experience with the Force than Luke has had. The difference, of course, is that we have seen Luke at later stages of his life, whereas any comparison which involved Rey beyond this time period would be based solely on speculation and projection, because The Rise of Skywalker was the latest time that we saw her in action. Now with all of that being laid out, let's dig into this. For this comparison, we will be analyzing these characters' accomplishments, their raw or their genetic potential, depending on where that conversation takes us, their lightsaber skills, and then we will also compare some of their specific Force abilities in an effort to weed out any intangibles that may set them apart. So here we go. Starting out with accomplishments. Luke has destroyed the first Death Star, survived one encounter with Darth Vader, defeated Darth Vader, and then turned Darth Vader back to the light side of the Force. And then on the other hand, we have Rey, who has defeated and injured Kylo Ren on Starkiller Base, taken out a few highly skilled Praetorian guards after Kylo Ren killed Supreme Leader Snoke, and she too has proven herself a very skilled pilot in both The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, as she evades and eventually takes out numerous First Order TIE fighters. Now to me, just looking at these major accomplishments alone, I think this one is pretty obvious. Luke takes the cake in this category, and it's really not that close. Did he have more opportunities to prove himself? Yeah, probably. Were their circumstances different? Of course, but we can only go off of what we've seen, and the fact of the matter is that at these points in their lives, Luke's track record is greater than Rey's. She did defeat Palpatine in The Rise of Skywalker, but as we know, that wasn't really her. It was all of the Jedi Force ghosts channeling their power into her, and so we can't fairly give her credit for that win in a discussion that is strictly about her power. Now, the fact that she was strong enough mentally and physically to handle that amount of power flowing through her is a very interesting idea and something I would love to look into in a different video, but for the purpose of this video specifically, we just can't give Rey credit for a defeat over Palpatine, because at the end of the day, that wasn't her power against his, it was the Jedi versus the Sith. But anyways, next category, and this is a bit of an interesting one. Technically, Luke's genetic potential as a Skywalker is slightly greater than Rey's as a Palpatine, but Rey is one half of a dyad with Ben Solo. And again, this is bringing other characters into an evaluation of Rey's power, but in the case of the dyad specifically, we kind of have to, because the dyad is literally the reason Rey became so powerful so quickly in the first 2 movies of the sequel trilogy. It grants her access to abilities which she would have otherwise not been able to use. So this intangible bond she shares with Ben is literally making her more powerful, and it's not like with the Force Ghosts where they were essentially using her to channel their power through her. She has just as much right to this knowledge as Ben does. 2 that are one, they are 2 halves of one whole. So I feel like we do have to include that in a question about her raw strength in the Force. So for this category, I'm actually going to give the edge to Rey. I understand if you wouldn't do that because you want to go strictly on genetic potential and say that Skywalkers do have a slightly higher midichlorian count than Palpatines, but this is what makes sense to me, and so I think Rey takes the cake here. She has an uncanny ability to learn on the fly thanks to this unique connection, and I just don't think that's a feat that we can ignore for this discussion. But now we move on to lightsaber skills. And again, this is a bit of an interesting comparison. I mean, look, if we just look at what we saw on screen, Rey is better. She's more flashy than Luke. She appears faster and more agile, but we're not going to look at it that way because these movies were made decades apart from one another, so that's simply not fair to Luke. So let's do some more digging. Rey grew up on Jakku, where she frequently had to defend herself with her staff. Now, wielding a staff is not the same as wielding a lightsaber, but it's not really deniable that that gives her a leg up on Luke in terms of where they started. They both undergo some proper training, as we've seen on screen, and then of course we can assume they also both trained in the time jumps between these movies. But really, the best way to evaluate these two, or really to evaluate anyone, I think, is to simply look at their success against their opponents, which kind of goes back to the accomplishments category to some degree. So let's isolate things so that we are only looking at their success in the movies for which we are evaluating their power. In Return of the Jedi, Luke defeats Darth Vader. Some say Vader let him win, some say Vader really couldn't handle his son in that moment. I say they were probably pretty evenly matched, Luke a little faster, Vader more powerful and more physically dominant, but I do think Vader was holding back a little because he did not want to kill his son, but in the end, he does win. Luke defeats Vader. And then we look at Rey, who is also fighting someone who does not want to kill her. Kylo Ren is always holding back in their duels, and yet he is dominant over her in The Rise of Skywalker. He literally treats her as a non-threat. He circles her with his back turned, he easily blocks all of her attacks, and in their final duel, when he does put his pedal to the metal, Rey pretty quickly ends up on her back and at his mercy. She is probably more of a threat than Kylo treats her as at times, but truly, he is just more powerful at these stages of their lives. And he should be, there's nothing wrong with that, and it's not a knock against Rey. He's roughly a decade her senior, and obviously he's had way more training and experience. But this is the reality, and this is the simplest way I think we can evaluate this comparison. I do not believe that Kylo Ren was a better duelist than Darth Vader. And so if Luke defeated Vader but Rey lost to Kylo, that pretty clearly says that Luke is the better lightsaber duelist. And there's no strong counter argument out there that favors Rey here, so I'm going to give Luke a pretty solid edge in this category and then move on to the final one where we analyze some of these characters' specific Force abilities. Let's start with Rey and talk about Force Heal. Now, canonically, this is an extremely rare Force ability, as the only characters we have seen use it are Rey, Ben Solo, Grogu, and possibly Obi-Wan Kenobi in A New Hope, with Rey and Ben certainly utilizing a more intense version of this power, which is because of their bond. It allows them to literally bring each other back to life, although that can obviously result in the death of the character who is giving their life to save the other. But that power, along with Luke's ability to use Force Choke and Rey's ability to channel Force Lightning, are really the only unique powers we have that separate these two. Everything else they do in the movies is either a relatively basic power that we've seen many times before, or it's something they can both do at a high level. Examples of what I mean here would include things like Force Jump, the tried and true Jedi mind trick, and the ability to sense the presence of other beings or to see things before they happen. Normal things that many Jedi are capable of. Now, if we jump back a movie and look at The Empire Strikes Back versus The Last Jedi, it's actually pretty likely that Rey was more powerful at that stage in the game. And the most obvious instance of this is when Rey lifts the massive boulders at the abandoned Rebel base on Crate, whereas Luke struggled with much smaller rocks and failed to lift his X-Wing out of the swamp. I think it's pretty clear that because of her upbringing and her bond with Ben Solo, Rey is more naturally gifted than Luke and catches on to things more quickly in a lot of instances than he does. Luke was a stubborn farm boy. He often dwells on the past and mopes around and sometimes feels sorry for himself. Rey is a bit more optimistic. She came up as a desert scavenger. She's tougher and more resourceful than Luke was, and that gives her an advantage. I think Rey's resilience, in combination with her ability to learn very quickly, give her the edge in this final category of intangibles, which makes the overall comparison a tie of 2-2 if we want to look at things strictly in terms of numbers. But in my opinion, Rey is only capable of operating at her peak when she is working alongside Ben Solo, and vice versa. I've said this about Ben before, he literally becomes more powerful when he's working alongside Rey. So if we eliminate Ben from the situation altogether, as that's really the fair way to do this, Luke is the more well-rounded Force user at these stages of their lives. By the time of Return of the Jedi, although he's still more susceptible to getting down on himself, he does have a greater control over his emotions than Rey does. Rey, as we can see many times throughout the trilogy, including in The Rise of Skywalker, often gets very frustrated and angry. Luke is wiser than Rey, he's more experienced, and he's more patient. At the end of the day, he's just a better embodiment of what a true Jedi should be at these stages of their lives. He's had more time to learn the ways of the Force than Rey, who is often learning on the fly, as her entire story as we know it takes place in a 1-year time span. Based on the evidence, as we've said, he is the better lightsaber duelist. The one glaring advantage Rey does have, as we discussed, is that she is just more strong-willed than Luke is. Although she doesn't know her true lineage, Rey knows who she is and what she stands for. They're both stubborn, but Rey uses that to her advantage many times, whereas Luke's hard-headedness is often a burden for him. But still, in conclusion, if we look at the totality of everything we discussed, Luke is more powerful than Rey at these stages of their stories, but Rey has the advantage of time, as she's only 20 years old in The Rise of Skywalker to Luke's 23 in Return of the Jedi. And since we know how Luke's story ends, it seems that Rey does have the potential to surpass Luke at some point down the road, but that is also no small task. Luke does still have another 20+ years of development before he exiles himself on Ahch-To. So as far as that discussion goes, only time will tell, but as far as we know at this moment, Luke Skywalker was more powerful than Rey. And again, that is not any knock on Rey. She simply lacks the time and experiences that Luke has had, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like I said, she's 20 years old. She's just barely begun to live. She needs some time to figure things out. But now I am going to go ahead and wrap this video up here. I could go on about this topic for hours, but I think we've covered the major points for this comparison and come out of this thing with a pretty conclusive answer to the question. And hey, if you guys disagree with me, that is perfectly fine. This is just what I believe to be true based on what we know about this story. So if you think Rey is more powerful, that's great. Let me know in the comments section below. In fact, everyone go comment who you think is more powerful at these points in their lives and keep this discussion going if you'd like. Anyways, guys, I hope you did enjoy this video. If you did, please remember to drop a like to support the channel, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and of course, may the Force be with you always.